If you've just joined, my name is George. This is the Ignite stage. I'm going to be with you all the way through until the back end of today. Going to give you a little bit of a breakdown as to what to expect. We're about to get into our next conversation, empowering everyone, accessibility by design. Straight after that, we've got a conversation with ZZ Mills. Definitely stick around for that one. Followed by Spotify and the receipts. A conversation with Irene, 100 million followers, gaming in 3D, shaping the future of work, film, chatting to Rap Man himself, and then ending from there. But without further ado, let's get into the next conversation. It's empowering everyone, accessibility in design.
Welcome and thank you for joining us for this really interesting talk on innovation, design, and accessibility and the crossroads between those three, all right? We've got some incredible people here to brief us up on this. And I'll just start by saying my name's Samuel Etienne. I'm a reporter and producer at Bloomberg News here in London. I tend to cover tech as well as some of the biggest moves that governments and organizations are doing to create a more equitable society, which brings us on to accessibility in design and innovation. You know what? I'm going to let you both introduce yourselves. Please tell us about yourselves, about your role, and what gets you up out of bed in the morning. Let's start with yourself, Heidi.
Okay, hi, good morning, everyone. My name's Heidi Small. Despite the accent, I am actually British. And I've been in London about 24 years. And at JPMorgan, 17 years. We could talk about why I stayed there later today. I'm really fortunate to have a full-time role in disability inclusion. Kind of unique in financial services that JPMorgan hire people, have paid resources to drive our diversity, equity, and inclusion pillars. So my role is a great one, and that is driving employee experience, accommodations process, and disability confidence and inclusion in the bank. But I'm also doing an awful lot externally, events like this, looking to raise employment levels of a very, very underserved community. Disability covers all ages, ethnicities, genders, and as we all live longer, all of us will probably face it at some point. And the last point I'll say about the Office of Disability Inclusion, it's a very diverse community. So we're talking about both visible and non-visible conditions. That includes neurodiversity. That in itself is a broad term, as well as mental health and long-term health conditions. I'm a bit activist, which is what gets me up in the morning, and that is this desire and passion to drive change.
Nice. All right. Passion to drive change. Anthony, please tell us about yourself and also about sort of your career to date, especially within JPMorgan in this current role.
Thank you so much, and it's such a pleasure to be back here in London, one of my favorite places to come. So I'm Anthony Reynolds with JPMorgan Chase, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. I'm on our business growth and entrepreneurship pillar, where we focus on increasing access to capital to entrepreneurs of all kinds. And my main focus is traditional businesses. So we have your high growth startups, we have venture capital, we have executives, and then you have your traditional businesses. You might think of restaurants, pub, it could be a clothing shop, and that's kind of my sweet spot of focus. And so proud to be able to work at a firm that allows us to make impact in the community. And for me, it's personal. I'm actually a former entrepreneur. I like to say recovering entrepreneur. Once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur in that mindset. And it's also a passion for me too, because I'm actually a disabled veteran. So I have these different slices or themes. When you look at myself, you may not even know because I have a non-visible disability. But for me, it's passionate because as an entrepreneur, when you're out there trying to raise capital, when you're trying to sell to customers, it's extremely hard. It's hard to do all of these things. And then when you don't look like what maybe people may perceive as success, it's like this other additional barrier that's added onto you. So when I had success, when I had failure, one of the things that I learned is how can I give back? How can I make impact? And lo and behold, JPMorgan Chase had this amazing opportunity to come make impact. So I love to, kind of wake up every day and get to make this transformational impact all over the world. Literally, we have offices all over the world. We focus on making impact all over the world for entrepreneurs and for all communities of all kinds. So it's such a pleasure. So thank you.
So I see people nodding when you say change and when you say impact, right? You're both sort of aligned, which is a good thing because you both work together. So what I want to learn, and what the audience probably want to learn, is how accessibility and innovation is tied. Is there a particular business case for it? Or why is there a focus on accessibility in design? And does it need to sort of be introduced early on when you're sort of putting together a proposal? Or, as we perhaps see today, it being sort of something that's bolted on occasionally to, you name it, various businesses or projects or innovations? I know Heidi's nodding away here.
Yeah.
Do bring the mic closer to you as well, by the way.
Sure, thanks for that. My motto and the name of this panel is Accessibility by Design, and I follow that up with Not by Exception. So I want to talk about product design, and that could be anything from literally a product on the shelf that people are purchasing, an app, a financial product. What often happens, even an event, right? That's a product. What often happens is accommodations is hidden at the bottom of, do you have any accommodation requirements? And it's hidden at the bottom of the page, and you've got to scroll down, and maybe people fill it out, maybe they don't. Accommodations are usually the last thought. So people will come knock on my door and say, hey, we're looking at this. And I turn up in the 11th hour, and I said, hey, you didn't think about the right font for dyslexic or for other neurodivergent, color blindness. That particular app hadn't really thought about screen readers, even PowerPoints that are put together. And then because it's the 11th hour, all of a sudden, that accessibility becomes a major headache for the product dev team. And they usually aren't pleased about the recommendations I'm making. So when I talk about passion to drive change and being a bit activist, my dream is we have accessibility by design. So all of our events are inclusive. They include sign language like we have today in multiple languages. The food at the food court includes gluten-free for celiacs, dairy-free for allergy intolerances, and every space is accessible. We're not there yet.
Can I ask a follow-on? So I really liked what you said initially on accessibility by design and it not being an exception, right? Yeah. And also, I don't know if you guys do this, like you fill in a job application or something similar, right? Or even an application to attend here. And then right at the bottom, you might have, do you want to declare your gender? Do you want to declare your race? Do you want to declare if you have a disability or anything similar, right? I'm really bad for this. I just click prefer not to say because I don't want to dish out the data. I don't know if it's going to be used for or against me. A little bit skeptical. But what I'm getting at is we often see these things bolted on at the end. Is it more costly when that happens? In terms of the business case and the cost for a project or an app, as you mentioned, or an event.
Yes.
So the business case being you need to sort of bring this in nice and early, right? When you're coming up with, I don't know, we have entrepreneurs here, so your app or your business or whatever proposal you have, it needs to be integral. When do you suggest people consider accessibility by design in their entire sort of project or proposal?
Well, there were kind of two questions in there. One was around, you did mention recruitment, and that's a really hot topic. It's the one in inside events, graduate recruitment events. It's the number one question that we get hit with. And it's whispered, I'm dyslexic, and should I put that on my application? And I foot forward reply to them and say, you can choose to disclose, that's up to you. But you must ask for what you need to be successful in that role, because without it, you're unlikely to fare well in the hackathon or the assessment center. And I'm dyslexic, and guess what? I was in finance and managed a $2.2 billion P&L, and I was dyslexic, right? So, and I was apologetic about it back then. I'm not today. So yes, so that's for anybody that's in the audience or listening in that is here to look for a role. Sticking with recruitment as a product, because we do look at our HR services as product operating model. One of the dialogue we had with, and this is, believe me, it does answer your question. It's product design, but in HR. We flipped it's at the very bottom. We encouraged and retrained our recruiters to ask the question up front, is there anything that you need for this interview? They're not asking, tell me if you have a disability or what is your disability? What do you need? Is there anything that we can do for you? Last minute, that 11th hour I talked about is always more costly, and it's a negative experience for your customer. All of a sudden, they've become the problem. I hope that answers the question.
That very much answers it. Heidi, I almost imagine you doing a lot of problem solving, and perhaps the aim for this sort of entire sector as a whole is to not be solving problems, but actually proposing solutions early on, right?
Making it part of how we do business and making it part of even hiring manager or business owner mindset, that it's just part of, and how well you do, and the client experience, disabled client experience, is just as important of measure as, say, profitability or revenue.
That's really interesting. And I think it's something that's not considered generally within finance, within business as a whole, within tech, you name it, right? Anthony, talk to me about sort of the business case for your work within JPMorgan. How do you sell it? How do you craft the story around the business case for what you're doing daily?
Thank you so much, and that's definitely a great question. So, as you know, I guess I would start that to answer that question with another question. If you had a business and you had 5 people in a room, and you took one of your customers out of the room, let's just say hypothetically they had a disability, and you didn't sell to them, well, you're missing to that customer, right? It's maybe 1 in 5 people identify with a disability worldwide. Yet a lot of businesses aren't really focused to what Heidi was mentioning earlier, to making it fully accessible and having that kind of full opportunity to capture the market. When you're talking about over $1 trillion in economic opportunity.
Sorry, just say that again.
$1 trillion in economic opportunity. So that's like the total addressable market when you look at persons that identify with disability and worldwide. And what we try to focus on is, at our firm, is increasing access to capital, technical and educational resources, so those entrepreneurs that do have a disability or identify with a disability have maybe more resources to grow and scale their businesses in the marketplace, but also providing education and awareness to rooms like this, that, hey, this is an actual opportunity in the market for folks to potentially serve new customers. If you have a business that's not wheelchair accessible, and someone wants to buy a product, but they can't because it's not wheelchair accessible, well, you as a business owner, from an economic standpoint, really aren't focused on making revenue because you're not selling to the whole market. So it's just kind of really, I think, explaining to folks the economic opportunity if we can have all peoples of all kinds participate. So that's mainly my business case is the bottom line. If you want to make more money, increase the opportunity to the customers you could sell.
And Anthony, you say you're a former entrepreneur.
Yes.
Are you recovering, right? Are you still interacting with those entrepreneurs on a daily basis within various sectors, and you're advising them, right?
Yes. So we actually have some phenomenal programs at JPMorgan Chase. Right now, we work with Chamber of Commerce around the world. I just attended an event in California with the National Asian Chamber of Commerce, National ACE, and it was phenomenal to work with traditional business owners making impact and talking about scale opportunity. And it depends on the stage of business. So I actually mentor for high growth startups too. And we also have a high growth startup team as well within our firm. And it's just really, I think, when you're not in the day of the business, you can see things differently. as a recovering entrepreneur, when you're on the grind, you're focused on sales, you could be making the sale, closing the deal, having to do the administrative piece and take out the trash, afterwards, and you may not see the actual potential market opportunity. So it's a lot easier for someone like myself to step in and say, hey, maybe you should look at this problem differently. You're looking at it B2C. Could it be B2B2C if you're looking to channel and really scale your product throughout the market? So it's something I love to do and make impact, and something I think our firm does really well.
Go for it, Heidi.
Yeah, I was just listening to Anthony, and I was thinking about my own journey into DE&I. I was front office, so I was in M&A and deals, and after 15 years of that, I was keen to do something more, but JPMorgan lifts people out of the business to come into DE&I, and in this case, Office of Disability Inclusion. We understand both sides of it, the business, but also the commitment to inclusion. So,
all right. So Anthony said something that pricked my ears up, right? He said there's a market opportunity of over $1 trillion. I don't know. In fact, can we have a show of hands? Anyone here an entrepreneur? Or anyone here who'd like to own or run their own business in the future? A couple hands. Don't worry, I'm not going to call you out. I'm not going to bring you up to talk or anything like that. But my point being, there's cash money on the table, right? And if you're someone who hopes to become a business leader within a large firm or an entrepreneur, you need to consider the accessibility of your product, of whatever service you're offering, right, to the market. Super, super interesting. Over $1 trillion. That's kind of blown my mind. Go on, Anthony.
Yeah, and if I may, and thank you so much for that. While I've been in London, we visited both the University College of London and their Disability Innovation Lab, and it was phenomenal how they're kind of looking at the market and solutions directly to these problems and trying to implement them at the early stage and addressing a lot of this at multiple points, and then also just the different impact from the philanthropic partners to the government and the other entities that are participating. I think I'm actually thoroughly impressed with here in the United Kingdom, there's the focus on disability inclusion and just making sure there is opportunity. So kudos to the folks here.
I don't know why, but I feel like saying, oh, thank you. Heidi as well as a Londoner. Like, yeah, cheers, you're impressed. All right, cool. So you guys come out here, you attend these talks, they have these lovely titles on accessibility and innovation by design and all these jargon terms, right? But in terms of what you leave with and what you go away with, you want some key sort of highlights and sort of notes that you can take home that are actionable, right? So we've got a couple people who are budding entrepreneurs here, etc. I imagine, again, another show of hands, how many of you here are just working within a large or small company? Vast majority, right? Yeah, we'd like to be entrepreneurs one day. So then, what can people who are here take away from this talk to perhaps apply within or raise within their company, be it HR or elsewhere, when it comes to sort of accessibility of products or of whatever? It could even be screens that they're staring at all day, or whatever, service that their company is selling. Sort of what can they take away from this talk and say, hey, we should perhaps be applying that because Heidi mentioned it on stage yesterday, or Anthony actually advises high-growth startups that they should do this. What key sort of actionable points do you want people to leave with here?
Yeah, I'll start first. I'll speak on two perspectives. I'll speak from a startup perspective and then a corporate perspective. So I think entrepreneurs and startup businesses, both high growth and traditional, when you're building out a product or solution, really think about your customer. You have your target audience, but then is it accessible? A lot of times we think of things in our own view. So we may only build something for a problem that we identify with. However, is it fully accessible to the entire market? So when you're building out a mobile application, can it be read back via text, right? A lot of apps cannot. There are specific requirements, but websites, there are accessibility requirements. A lot of them aren't accessible. So when you're building out your website for your company, make it fully accessible from the beginning. I think will also help from a regulatory perspective. So let's say you are successful and you do well. Well, if you aren't compliant with government regulations, that opens you up to potential legal troubles because it's not fully accessible. So just think about that when you're building things out from the get-go. And then also, I would say, in my opinion, really try to go to different places, different avenues. So let's say I'm selling a product to this specific group of people. Is it open to everybody? And just kind of thinking of it a little bit differently. And then I'll quickly talk about the corporate side is being open to ideas. I think being open to people's perspectives, if they're neurodivergent, and maybe what are those needs? They might be different than what you associate a need to be. So maybe it's a quiet space. I know we have a quiet space here today. Some people may need to decompress. And hey, I need time. When I was in Afghanistan, I mean, our base got rocket attacked nonstop. So for me, just having sometimes my own quiet space and not being in a crowded room, I need that space. So that's just my own personal needs. So yeah, I think that's where I'd leave it.
That's really useful. Thank you. So I was taking notes there as well, right? Because I want to look good within my company. And the key thing there was be customer first focused, especially if you're an entrepreneur, right? But also, if you're working within a large organization, it makes sense. And also be open to ideas. It's a way of making yourself look very good within a company when you're considering the P&L and perhaps what that company can do to open themselves up to a wider market, right? Heidi.
I'm going to switch to the employee experience, manager experience, the human side. So lived experience is terminology that we use. Understand the lived experience of people different than you. And allyship, so you don't have to have a visible or non-visible condition to be active in this space. When things go wrong in the workplace, it isn't because a manager or a colleague is an evil person. It's because they didn't understand, they didn't know where to go for support. Maybe they used the wrong terminology. So the biggest piece of advice I would give to startups, entrepreneurs who are considering expanding their marketplace, or even their team that they're working with, is to consider the lived experience of the people that they're working with or the customer base that they're serving. And if you aren't already, get involved as an ally in this space. This is the most underserved community from an employment perspective.
Wow.
Yeah, even including, generally they'll be a family with a disabled person on average in the UK faces on average £1,200 a month in additional expenses. That excludes any kind of benefits they might be getting from the government. So that's a lived experience that other people won't be facing.
That's super interesting. So consider others, right? Consider how their experiences within the workplace and also how they interact with these services and products. Anthony, you mentioned one thing, and it was for the budding, hopeful future entrepreneurs. There we go, just said it among us. And it's consider regulation, right? And government regulation. And it brings me on to something we were just discussing backstage. And what I'm keen to learn is how you see this sort of sphere of accessibility and innovation with the approach to design differing by geographies, right? Certain governments have certain approaches. Just talk me through how you see things differing to what you do in Europe, to the US, to LATAM, to Asia, perhaps what you do within JPMorgan, but also what you see within the wider sort of industry and sector. That's for, shall we start with yourself, Heidi?
Sure. I'm the international lead, so primary focus at the moment is Europe, so our EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. We've got 12 countries in region that the governments in those countries have implemented quotas for disability representation within the workforce. And as a major employer in countries like France and Frankfurt, and those governments see that we have a duty in helping lift and improve the employment of the disabled community. It's a tough gig because there are quotas that have to be interpreted and they become a percentage and there's recruiting costs, but that's even before you look at the diversity of the very definition of disability. Is it ability and fitness for work? Does it or doesn't it include things like neurodiversity? And on top of that, there are significant cultural differences in countries. You know, in some countries, disability is very accepted, and we still have countries today where it's a taboo, perhaps something that's hidden away, unlikely to have a university education and go on to, speak English as a second language. So I kind of give my American colleagues a hard time because in the US it's very homogenized. They have the Americans with Disability Act. In Europe it's complex with the ECB pushing regulation and then that being interpreted into law by all of the European countries. Very complex topic.
Thank you so much. And I think just echoing what Heidi just mentioned, you actually see that in the approach of actually startups and even traditional businesses. As they look to scale to markets, there's this approach that I've seen that the US first, then Canada, then the UK, then the rest of Europe. So because of the regulation component. So that's just some things that we have identified. A lot of startup businesses will kind of approach from a geographic standpoint. And then as well, I think when you're looking at the hiring requirements too, there's a lot of challenges for startup businesses as they have to meet these different requirements, and then not including the actual product regulations. It's usually, to Heidi's point earlier, the 11th hour. They're not looking at it from the beginning. So anytime I can get a chance to have that conversation early on, like we're here today, and let businesses know, like, hey, think about this. Hopefully, my goal as an entrepreneur, as someone that's been in that space as a recovering entrepreneur, is, I like to say I got an MBA on the streets of business, right? I didn't get an MBA from school, but I got it from learning, from failing, from making mistakes. Is how can I help others not make as many bumps in the road? Give that knowledge, give that advice. And one big piece I would like to share is accessibility. Think about it early. Thinking about incorporating that design piece early on, I think will help businesses of all kinds be successful, increasing your market, over $1 trillion available, and then as well reducing your liability when it comes to potential risk from regulations.
Thank you both. All right, that covers sort of the regulation side of things as well as how things differ by geographies. We've got about 2 minutes left, right? I want to know what are some good or standout examples of sort of designs or innovations where accessibility has been woven into it, and that product, business, service, you name it, has been wildly successful, either because of it or perhaps that's just a byproduct. I'd love to know very just quick examples that you like.
I actually like the telephone. If you know the history,
say that again.
If you know the history of the telephone,
okay.
Alexander Graham Bell, and actually why he was able to create the telephone, it was actually because of his knowledge in teaching those that were deaf. And his understanding of how to communicate with deaf and learning about the actual ear and how the ear could understand sound is actually what created the patent for the telephone. So if you look back at history, at very critical points of technology revolution, a lot of times the founder of that technology or innovation either disabled themselves or very close tied to that industry and space. Look at video relay. So, I mean, I could literally list a full feature like, your Siri, voice to text, right? All these different features were actually intended first to help people with disabilities. So, Alexander Graham Bell and the telephone, I think, is pivotal. But real quick, I'll go with a company called Right Here. They're a startup company. They went through a JPMorgan Chase Accelerator program, and they developed a wayfinding technology for those blind and low vision. So they're embedded at the airports, LaGuardia Airport, and they're hoping to scale that. And just think about when you get off a plane. You don't know where you are. You have to look at the screens. Imagine your phone telling you where to go. I think that's amazing. It was designed for people with disability and helps someone like me who could be overwhelmed with all the lights, sounds, and whistles.
Yeah. Heidi, very quickly, like 20 seconds or so.
Love that concept. I'm going to say closed captioning,
Okay, yeah.
which
I hear
is
you.
today being leveraged by people with processing disorders. They can slow down the speed and consume the dialogue at their own pace. So designed for deaf and hard of hearing, but being used by a much, much larger community.
Like the telephone, as Anthony mentioned. I quite like that. I'm someone who watches Netflix and everything with subtitles on because I like to track, just in case you can't hear it properly. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. I hope you've taken away those key actionable points, right? This day is an amazing day, but it's all about going away with stuff that you can apply right within your business or organization tomorrow. So thank you very much to Heidi and Anthony, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.